Montana's High Line, a vast stretch of U.S. Route 2 that slices through the northern plains, is known for its stunning landscapes and small, tight-knit communities. But amid the serene beauty and the endless expanse of farmland, a dark shadow loomed. An unidentified serial killer had been operating along this desolate stretch of road, leaving a trail of fear and death in his wake. It all began with the disappearance of Mary Thompson, a 27-year-old school teacher from Havre. Mary had been last seen leaving a friend's house late one evening, driving her blue sedan down the High Line. When she didn't show up for work the next day, her colleagues reported her missing. The search for Mary was extensive. Volunteers combed through the vast, open fields and rugged terrain, but it wasn't until a week later that her car was found abandoned in a ditch, miles away from any town. There were no signs of a struggle, but Mary's purse and personal belongings were still inside. The only clue was a single strand of barbed wire caught in the car's door handle. The local authorities were baffled. Mary had no enemies, and there was no apparent motive for her disappearance. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade, and the community braced itself for the worst. It wasn't until a month later that a group of hikers stumbled upon Mary's body in a remote area of the Bear Paw Mountains. She had been strangled, her body carefully posed, and her eyes closed as if in a peaceful sleep. The second and third victims. The discovery of Mary's body sent shockwaves through the High Line. The peaceful communities that dotted the landscape were gripped by fear. Parents kept their children close, and neighbors looked at each other with suspicion. But the terror was only beginning. A few months later, another woman went missing. Susan Parker, a 34-year-old nurse from Glasgow, vanished without a trace while driving home from a late shift at the hospital. Her car was found abandoned in a similar manner to Mary's, and the only clue was another strand of barbed wire. Susan's body was discovered 2 weeks later, in the same chilling fashion as Mary's. The pattern was clear. The killer targeted women driving alone at night along the High Line, leaving their cars abandoned and bodies posed in remote locations. The third victim, Karen Fisher, a 29-year-old waitress from Malta, disappeared just a few weeks after Susan's body was found. Her fate was the same, her body discovered in the hills near Zortman. The local authorities realized they were dealing with a serial killer, and the FBI was called in to assist. Special Agent Emily Carter was assigned to the case. A seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving difficult cases, she arrived in Montana determined to catch the killer. Her first step was to analyze the crime scenes and gather as much information as possible about the victims. Agent Carter quickly noticed the similarities between the cases. All three women were in their late 20s to early 30s, had no known enemies, and lived alone. Their cars were abandoned in similar locations, and the barbed wire found at each scene seemed to be a calling card left by the killer. Carter also noticed that the killer was careful, leaving little evidence behind. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no witnesses. It was as if the killer was a ghost, moving through the High Line undetected. Determined to find a break in the case, Carter began interviewing friends and family members of the victims. She discovered that all three women had mentioned feeling like they were being watched in the weeks leading up to their disappearances. They had also received strange phone calls from an unknown number, but the calls were too short to trace. Agent Carter began to build a profile of the killer. She believed he was a local, someone who knew the area well and could navigate the remote terrain without being seen. He was methodical and careful, likely someone who enjoyed the thrill of the hunt and the power he felt over his victims. Carter also believed the killer had a deep-seated hatred for women, possibly stemming from a past trauma or rejection. His careful posing of the bodies suggested he saw them as objects to be controlled and displayed, rather than as human beings. With this profile in hand, Carter and her team began to narrow down their list of suspects. They focused on men with a history of violence against women, those who lived alone or had jobs that allowed them to travel frequently. They also looked into local hunters and outdoorsmen, anyone who had the skills to navigate the rugged terrain where the bodies were found. Despite their best efforts, the investigation seemed to stall. The killer was careful, leaving no trace of his identity behind. Frustration grew as the months passed, and the community's fear deepened. But then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A local farmer named Bill Matthews contacted the authorities after finding a strange piece of barbed wire on his property, near where Mary's car had been abandoned. Matthews was a meticulous man, and he knew every inch of his land. The barbed wire was new, and he had no idea how it had ended up there. Agent Carter rushed to the scene and examined the wire. It matched the pieces found at the crime scenes, but there was something else, tiny flecks of paint embedded in the metal. The paint was an unusual shade of blue, and Carter realized it might be a crucial clue. She sent the wire to the FBI lab for analysis, and the results confirmed her suspicions. The paint was from a specific brand used primarily for farm equipment. With this new information, Carter and her team began to cross-reference the paint with recent purchases in the area. The search led them to a man named James Logan, a 45-year-old mechanic who lived on a remote farm near the High Line. Logan was known for his reclusive nature and had a history of violence, including a restraining order filed by his ex-wife. He also had a collection of old farm equipment, all painted with the same shade of blue as the paint on the barbed wire. Carter and her team began to surveil Logan, watching his every move. They noticed he often drove along the High Line at night, taking long, solitary drives. He also frequented the same areas where the victims had disappeared, and he seemed to have an unusual fascination with abandoned places. With enough evidence to obtain a warrant, Carter and her team moved in to arrest Logan. They found him in his workshop, meticulously working on a piece of equipment. Logan didn't resist, his expression calm and detached as they placed him in handcuffs. Inside Logan's farmhouse, the team found more damning evidence. There were maps of the High Line with specific locations marked, and a collection of old photographs of women who looked eerily similar to the victims. They also found a journal filled with disturbing entries, detailing his thoughts and fantasies about stalking and killing women. Logan was taken into custody and interrogated by Carter. He initially denied any involvement, but as the evidence mounted, his facade began to crack. Under pressure, he finally confessed to the murders, describing in chilling detail how he had stalked and killed his victims. The arrest of James Logan brought a sense of relief to the High Line communities. The fear that had gripped the region began to dissipate, and people slowly returned to their normal lives. But the scars of his crimes would take longer to heal. Agent Emily Carter was hailed as a hero for her relentless pursuit of the killer. She continued to work on cold cases, using her skills to bring justice to other victims and their families. The story of the High Line killer became a dark chapter in Montana's history, a reminder of the evil that can lurk in the most unexpected places. But it was also a testament to the strength and resilience of the community and the determination of those who seek justice. Years later, the High Line still bore the memories of the terror that once haunted it. The small towns and vast landscapes carried an air of vigilance, a collective understanding that darkness could emerge even in the most serene places. In Havre, a memorial was erected in honor of Mary, Susan, and Karen. It stood as a symbol of remembrance and resilience, a place where people could come to reflect and pay their respects. The community, forever changed by the events, found solace in coming together, supporting each other in ways they hadn't before. As for Agent Emily Carter, she continued her work with the FBI, her reputation growing with each case she solved. Her experience in Montana had taught her invaluable lessons about the human psyche and the lengths to which evil could go. But it had also shown her the strength of the human spirit and the power of justice. The High Line killer's story became a cautionary tale, shared around campfires and in hushed conversations. It served as a reminder that vigilance and community spirit could prevail against the darkest of threats. And though the scars remained, the people of the High Line stood united, determined to protect their home from any shadows that might come their way. In the end, the High Line of Montana was more than just a stretch of road. It was a testament to the resilience of a community that had faced unimaginable fear and emerged stronger. And as the years passed, the memory of the High Line killer faded into history, leaving behind a legacy of courage, unity, and hope.